All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. The tragic and sad incompetence of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I have done a number of videos about the Hall of Fame. I've done videos about bands who should be in the Hall of Fame. Um, the Hall of Fame has become an organization that seems to have a very narrow view of what should be in their museum. Okay. And the reason I say it like that is because clearly there's some kind of an agenda. All right. A couple of years ago, Stevie Nicks got in. She went up there, gave a speech how she was the first woman who had been in a rock band who then got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And the complaint was, we need more of that. The problem is there aren't a whole bunch of women who were in bands who then went out solo and became as successful. And you could say, okay, they released a solo album, then they went back to their band. Whereas, guys like Don Henley leaves the Eagles, has a really productive solo career. He could have just as easily got in as a solo artist as Stevie Nicks. So to me, that seemed like it was agenda driven and not merit driven. And we see this over and over. This year, thankfully, two women are being inducted who very much deserve to be in. And it's always nice to see a couple get in who really should have been in a long time ago, who deserve it. I'm talking, of course, of Tina Turner and Carole King. Tina Turner, one of the greatest live performers of anything. Let's just say it. Her life story is compelling. Her vocals straddle that R&B meets, rock and roll in a way that very few other artists during the 80s. So many artists wanted to work with Tina Turner. Some did, some didn't. The point is, she was a hot commodity and deservedly so. Unlike a lot of artists who start and then leave, Tina Turner had one of the greatest second acts in the history of anything. Just an amazing sort of comeback, revival, however you want to describe it. Carole King, I think she was born a songwriter. I think when she came out of the womb, she asked for a pacifier and a pen. I mean, this is a woman who was writing songs as a teenager that most adults wouldn't be able to wrap their brain around. She became a solo artist, and she became a force of nature as a solo artist. Vocally speaking, one of the more unique deliveries in the history of music. And during the 1970s, just an iconic radio staple on most, I will say, adult contemporary, but also most just, regular music stations that played the top 40. She's been ignored for many years, finally getting in there this year. But of course, that begs the question, say, why isn't Carly Simon in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? All right. Why isn't Pat Benatar in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? The GoGos, obviously, another interesting choice for the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm going to say that they were enormously influential and important. But if you're talking body of work, and you can't say that about Carly Simon, you can't say that about Pat Benatar, you can't say that about Tina Turner. The Go-Go's have a very small body of work. I know they've released music a few years ago, got back together again. But to me, you have to look at those first 2 or 3 albums, right? Those 3 albums they recorded in the 80s, and that's it. Is that enough to get them in? Yeah, I guess, because the standard at the Hall isn't output necessarily. It's certainly not popularity that's, based on what the general population wants to see in the Hall of Fame. And I'll give it to the Go-Go's. They couldn't play their instruments when they started. They became a real amazing band again for 3 albums, and that was kind of it, 3 and out. And Belinda Carlisle went on to have a pretty successful solo career for a few years, but they were primarily an 80s commodity. The 90s came along and you didn't hear from them again. Radio had no use for them except on the all 80s shows that started popping up because the music was so bad that people had to have a respite from what they were listening to all day, and they could tune in and hear like the 80s at 8, and the Go-Go's were always on programming like that. The Hall of Fame in general is such a schizophrenic organization. The things that they put in, do they need to redefine for their audience, meaning the Hall of Fame's audience, what rock and roll is? Do they need to redefine that? Because it seems each year something gets in there that doesn't seem to be rock and roll to me. And it doesn't even have any of the bones of rock and roll. You know, you could argue that most R&B artists from the past were leaning on, or actually they were, the main structure of their building was an element that you could find in rock and roll. Rock and roll was built off of blues. R&B is rhythm and blues, all right? But R&B is different than blues, but there's an element to it that you can kind of find and say, okay, it's like going through the foundation of a house and saying, okay, this is the R&B beam that supports the foundation of this house, all right, to use a tortured analogy. Stuff's getting in the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years to me that it belongs in its own music Hall of Fame that's different from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It just is, unless we're going to redefine what it is. Because if we redefine what it is, then there's a whole bunch of music out there from a number of different genres that probably should be considered for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't think they ought to do that. I think they ought to focus on rock and roll, and they need to define what rock and roll is. There are a lot of hard rock and heavy metal groups that are trying to get into the Hall of Fame that are having difficulty getting in for whatever reason, who are far more representative in their approach to recording music than some of the things that are getting in. And I've struggled with this for a number of years, and I'm just thinking you need more specialized, more localized, more specific representation for, I'm not saying this music shouldn't be honored. I'm saying honor it over here. Okay. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think, again, there's some other agenda at work where they redefine what people are supposed to like, which most individuals know what they like. There's certain music that I don't like to listen to, believe it or not. People send me things that aren't even that far off the beaten track, and I'll say, yeah, it's okay. It's just not my cup of tea. I mean, I'm open-minded to a point, and I'll listen to a lot of different things, but you know, if it doesn't affect me in almost a spiritual way, it's not going to be in my, you know, go-to library or arsenal of music that I need each day. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I listen to. I get moody and I want to hear a certain thing, and I'll listen to country, I'll listen to jazz, I'll listen to rock, I'll listen to pop, I'll listen to oldies, I'll listen to, you know, soft California West Coast stuff. I'll listen to heavy metal and hard rock, bluesy stuff. I'm a big fan of the blues and blues rock. And it's a pretty wide swath of music. And I know what I like and I know what I don't like. The issue with the Hall of Fame, though, is they're trying to make you like something. And in the process, they're also trying to redefine what a certain style of music is. And I don't see it. It's like Just stop it. Just honor the people that need to be honored. There's so many bands, and we've gone through it over and over again. I think at the top of my list is the band Steppenwolf, because they're a 60s band, primarily started in the 60s, went into the early 70s, and they influenced just so much music that came later. And they were also kind of a strong voice in that generation, lyrically speaking. They were a little controversial at times, which I think is typically in the wheelhouse of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like, they'll nominate MC5 every year, who I think are horrible, but I understand why they get nominated, but they won't put Steppenwolf in. Just weird. Anyway, congratulations to Tina Turner and to Carole King. Way overdue. Each year, there are at least a couple of artists. I remember when the Moody Blues got inducted, I'm like, this is insane. This band should have been in like 20 years ago. And here they are, all of them. The drummer, was it Graham? He was up there and basically, I'm an old man, and what took you guys so long? He could barely play drums at this stage. And it was just sad. They wait so long that these artists, some of them, can't even get up there and perform anymore. And typically at the Hall of Fame ceremony, you're going to play a couple of tunes and people are going to cheer. And it's just sad. I mean, I'm assuming there are going to be a lot of people that get inducted posthumously. And that's such a crime. Just honor the people while they're here, so their family, their fans, everybody can see it and say, yep, that's my band. I love that artist. And thankfully, they're in the Hall of Fame. It's not going to do much good to put in a bunch of folks that have already passed away. But I'm afraid at this rate, there's no way they're going to get everybody in, at least the people that deserve to be in. And maybe those people will never get in. Maybe there needs to be an alternative rather, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The People's Hall. People decide what gets into the Hall of Fame, and just induct all of those groups that we all grew up listening to, those artists who have been maligned, those artists who truly had influence over generations of music. With all apologies to the Foo Fighters, there are so many things that should have gone in before the Foo Fighters, but everything is political, everything is trendy, and it's who you know at the Hall of Fame. It's which guy is in the band. I just look at the Foo Fighters and say, well, Dave Grohl is in the Foo Fighters, and Dave Grohl is rock royalty right now. I don't dislike Dave Grohl, but I don't understand. There's just so much music that's not in the Hall and should be. So in any event, that's my video. Thanks for watching. You don't have to agree with me. This is, an opinion channel. I'm sure there are a few others out there that have similar opinions or slightly different takes on this. But this is year after year. This is what the Hall of Fame does. And it's just depressing. But do they get a couple right here and there? Yes, but it takes them an eternity to do it. All right. I'm done, really, truly. See you soon.